Matthew chapter 5, we see Jesus beginning the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount really is the cornerstone of Christian teaching. And we start with the Beatitudes, which are the very foundation of Christian character. If you want to know what Christian character should look like, Jesus tells us this in the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes the form is very simple. It says, blessed are the, and Jesus talks about character of people who are blessed. And really, this is a roadmap for developing a Christ-like character. And if anybody should understand what a roadmap looks like, it should be you guys, because land navigation is a big piece of your training. But we're not talking about reading a topographical map. We're talking about reading a character map about the kind of quality of person Jesus wants us to be. And we're going to see that in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read through the Beatitudes and then break it down a little bit as we look at Jesus' roadmap for developing godly character. Matthew chapter 5, we'll start at verse 1. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, this is a funny word that we see over and over, blessed. And we don't say that like that in any other place except for this. Normally we say blessed. But for some reason, when we're reading the Bible, we say blessed is the one blessed, right? Hashtag blessed. We're living that blessed life. And it's a weird word to translate. There's no one English word that perfectly encapsulates this idea of being blessed. It doesn't just mean being fortunate. Right? It could also, I guess you could say, lucky or fortunate. And all of those kind of are wrapped up into this idea. The Greek word is makarios. Like I said, there's no real good one English word that covers all of it. I guess if you were to think about it, it's kind of like the Hebrew word shalom, or peace. So when a person has shalom and they are at peace, then they are fortunate, they are lucky, they are blessed. So all of those things kind of encapsulate this idea. So when Jesus says, blessed are those, it's saying the person who has this has shalom in their spirit. They are at peace with everything. So let's get into this here. He kicks off saying, blessed are the poor in spirit. What does that mean? It means those who are humble and dependent on God. The person who is poor in spirit says, I recognize that I can't do this, that I am not good enough. No matter how hard I try, I'm still a flawed human being. I can't do this, and I need God in my life. We need to acknowledge our need for God's guidance every day. In the same way that a child depends on parents, we depend on God for everything because we can't do it by ourselves. To be poor in spirit. But then he goes on, he says, blessed are those who mourn. And mourning deals with sadness, with sorrow, even with a little bit of repentance. You know, coming off of the poor in spirit, we recognize our dependence on God, but then it leads to this mourning phase where like, oh, we are sad because of what we have done. For our failures and our flaws, we are mourning. It's not just about being sad, it's about recognizing our own nature. And when we come in a mournful spirit before God, and Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. But then Jesus builds on that and he says, blessed are the meek. And this one gets misinterpreted and misunderstood in our culture also, because we fear meekness. We have this idea that being meek is equal with being weak. And that's not what Jesus is saying. Meekness is not about weakness. It's not about being passive, about being a doormat and letting people walk all over you. Meekness really comes down to the idea of self-control, of even if you have power, not letting it get out of your control. Meekness is about reining in yourself and exercising a sense of gentleness and self-control. When Jesus goes riding into Jerusalem right before the crucifixion, he comes in meek and humble, riding on a donkey. Now, Jesus being meek, was he weak? Was he lacking in power? No, he's the Son of God. He has all the power. We have already seen him, by the time he gets to this crucifixion, we have seen him fighting with demons and kicking their butts. We have seen him curing incurable diseases. This is the man who wields power unlike anybody else in history. So being meek does not mean powerless. Being meek means being self-controlled. He goes on from there and says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now that's a heavy one. Righteousness is very much tied in the Bible to justice. To not just doing right personally, but making sure that the world is doing right by others. Justice and righteousness in the Bible means looking out for those who can't look out for themselves. We have a personal righteousness, and we are called to take care of others, to pursue righteousness and justice for everybody else. This is a huge piece to the gospel message. Not just that I need to act right, but I need to take care of my brother and take care of my sister. To be an advocate for those who have no voice. To stand up for those that no one else will stand up for. Blessed are the merciful. He's talking now about the way that we treat others with forgiveness and grace. To show mercy to other people in the same way that God has shown mercy to us. And here's the kicker. We don't deserve God's mercy. It's not like God is giving us forgiveness because we are worth it. It is unmerited. We haven't earned it. And God still treats us with mercy and forgiveness. And so we can act in a similar way, offering mercy, grace, and forgiveness to other people. And he goes on from there. He says, blessed are the pure in heart. This is about single-minded devotion to God. We sang that song this morning, Build My Life. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. That is the single-minded devotion. When Jesus says, blessed are the pure in heart, we got to ask, are we divided in our hearts? Does part of my heart belong to Jesus and another heart belong to something else? And we live life that way practically. We might say in our head, oh, I follow Jesus, but if you look at how our hearts live out, we have fractured and divided hearts. And we don't always say, Jesus, I'm all in. It's a great practice at the end of every day to ask yourself, hey, what went right today, but what can I do better tomorrow? And then to turn that into a daily prayer. God, this is what went right today. I felt like I was on track with you here, but these are some areas where I can do better tomorrow. And I want to be more like you tomorrow. As we pursue this purity in heart, the single-minded devotion. And he goes on from there, and Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. Man, that's a tough one. It's not just about being right with other people, but it's about helping other people be right with each other. To be a bridge builder in this world. To help reconcile people in this world. To restore relationships. It's not just enough for me to be right with God and leave everybody else behind, but Jesus calls us to actively be a force in this world. To be bridge builders and peacemakers. And then he says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Because that will happen. When we try to pursue righteousness, that persecution will come. And Jesus calls us to be steadfast and courageous, to stand firm in our faith and not turn our backs when things get tough. Because that does happen. Especially in a world, in a culture that doesn't necessarily believe what we believe or appreciate what we believe. You will find people who will mock you or ridicule you or even do things actively against you because of your faith. And Jesus says here, hold fast. Stand firm in your faith. Don't turn back just because it gets tough. And then it all comes down to this last one, number 9. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, all of the character traits lead up to this last one. Because Jesus says, if you've been following the kind of character traits that I am asking you to follow here, right? And poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, those who are peacemakers, those who pursue righteousness. All of that, if we are following the path that Jesus lays out, it leads to number 9, where others will revile you and persecute you and come against you. All of the Christian traits lead us to this understanding, that being intentional to follow Jesus will lead others to turn against us. It will attract some people, but there are a lot of people in this world who so much hate the idea of Jesus that the more we try to follow, the more they will turn against us. So he's telling us what Christian character looks like, and then this final warning and admonition saying, if you follow this path, it's going to put you at odds with the world. Because the world isn't like this. Christian character is topsy-turvy from what the world looks like. The world says, show force and power. Jesus says self-control and meekness. The world says, eye for an eye. If somebody gets you, you get them back. Jesus says, be merciful. The idea of the Christian character here in the Beatitudes is completely flipped upside down from what the world does. It's topsy-turvy. But this is what Jesus calls us to be. This is who Jesus calls us to be. And so if we are going to be authentically following the path of Jesus, then this is the roadmap for where we start. As we get into the Sermon on the Mount in the next few weeks, it all builds off of the character that Jesus is calling us to exhibit. Jesus says, you want to follow my path? This is what it looks like. So my encouragement to you guys this week, pick one of these Beatitudes. There are 9 of them. The blessed are, there are 9 of them. Pick one this week to focus on. And you don't have to confess it to anybody, but in the quiet of your own space, say, God, this is the one I have the hardest time with. This is the one I need the most growth in. Pick one of the Beatitudes this week to focus on and say, God, help me get better at this one. And we can use this Christian character roadmap to grow in our own character to be more like Jesus.